Welcome to MTAX 525. This is the summer 2022 session, and this is Valerie Sasaki. So I am going to be leading this course, but I'm excited to work with you as we go through it. Okay, so what we are going to talk about today, we are going to talk about, we'll do introductions first, or at least I will introduce myself to you, and I hope that you will introduce yourself to me. And then we'll talk about course mechanics. And course mechanics is basically just how the course is going to work. If you've got any questions about any of these things, feel free to bring it to office hours, but I thought it was worth going over a couple of different items. And then we'll start out on substantive material. So our week one substantive material, we're going to talk about sources of authority, intro to writing, what is electronic mail, when is it used, and then we'll talk briefly about Circular 230. We'll finish up talking again about the grading and evaluation and the first week's homework. So let's get started. Okay, course mechanics week one. Okay, so just by way of introduction, so my name is Valerie Sasaki. I'm an attorney and I practice with the law firm Samuels, Yolen, Cantor here in Portland, Oregon. In addition to being a full-time attorney, I am an adjunct professor in this program. I used to be a manager with KPMG in the state and local tax, and I served as an attorney at Miller Nash as well. Outside of the professional realm, I've got a very nice little dog and 3 chickens. I'm an aunt to 2 nephews and 1 niece, although we're expecting another niece here coming up in the fall, which I'm very excited about. I am also a volunteer board member for the Tiger Public Safety Advisory Board, and I serve on the Japanese Garden Foundation Board. For purposes of this course, what is relevant is that I am someone who cares deeply about effective communication. I think that this is an area that's really scary for a lot of folks. Perhaps verbal communication is more scary for more people, but I think written communication and presenting information that's not numbers is an area that's uniquely scary for a lot of accountants. I'm also someone who wants you to be successful in this class. I believe that you can be successful in this class. It's going to be a fairly large amount of work, and that unfortunately is grad school. The only way that you can get better at writing is by doing it. And so, let's get started on this journey together. And if you've got any questions, definitely let me know. Okay, so what are you going to learn? And this is not just in this course, but I recently learned that there are these program learning goals. And I think this is a thing that is automatic to full-time academics. They just assume that these things exist, but they didn't bother to tell me. So they didn't bother to tell the other students either. And so I thought, you know what? We should talk about these things. Because the program in its way to evaluate whether you are learning the things that you need to know will evaluate you on these things. And so the purpose of this course is to introduce you to these 4 different categories: critical thinking, research skills, technical tax knowledge, and business communication. Of the 4, the critical thinking, research skills, and business communication are the more relevant ones to this course. Most of your courses are going to be focusing on technical tax knowledge, but they're all important. So we're going to talk about what each of these looks like in more specific, and then we'll go over these, and I'll be using these when I give you feedback on your writing to help you develop the skills to be successful and to do well when they evaluate your ability to do these things at the end of the program. So the first and perhaps the most important is that graduates of this program are going to be effective decision makers who are able to critically analyze an economic, financial, or tax issue and develop a clearly supportable position or recommendation on the issue. Essentially, clients are going to come to you with questions. You're going to be able to think about the question critically, identify what is relevant and what is not relevant in the question, and then you will be able to make a recommendation. So you'll see that the things that they want as far as learning objectives within this goal really do, in some respects, parallel the research process and the writing process that we're going to work on in this class. So when you are called upon to think critically in other classes, hopefully it will provide a meaningful framework for you to be able to, use these tools to answer the question before you. Okay, So, you have to identify what are the relevant issues. What does the client care about? Students will identify relevant issues in relation to unstructured settings characterized by complex and incomplete information. What this means is that clients don't always tell you all the answers, all the pieces of the puzzle that you need. So you either have to extrapolate information, you have to assume information, or you have to ask your client to give you the information that you're missing. Okay? We'll talk about how to do that as we go through, because the problems that you'll work on in this class may not have all the pieces of information that you need to answer the problem. Draw meaningful insights. Students will develop and draw meaningful insights, conclusions, and develop alternatives from appropriately applied analysis. Essentially, you'll think critically about the facts, the client's facts, and you'll be able to say, okay, well, here, based on the facts and the law, here are the conclusions that I'm drawing, and here's what your options are, right? So, there are often many different paths that you can take from where a client is. Not all of them get the client to where they want to be, but part of what you are called upon is to identify what is possible, okay? But given where the client wants to get with their business, with their lives, with their family situation, you have to be able to make a recommendation to the client. You have to say, okay, what are the criteria that are important to this client in finding out what the answer to their problem is? How did they rate different things, different values? And then how can I tailor my recommendation to meet those objectives? How can we get the client from point A where they are to point B where they want to be? Economic focus. The idea here is that students will be able to utilize tax guidance to focus on the economic significance of the tax issue at hand rather than just the legal form of the issue. It's really easy to get lost in the weeds. So the idea here is materiality. And so you don't want to spend, thousands and thousands of dollars coming up with a solution to a problem that is, not that economically meaningful to your client. So the idea is that you need to be able to scale your projects, your research, and your answers to, not overburden your clients and get to an efficient answer. Okay. And then strategic planning. The idea is that you will develop a defensible strategic planning relating alternative courses of action in specific tax situations. So what is the best answer? What is the answer least likely to result in penalties for your client? And the idea is that you need to start thinking critically about problems that are put before you and figure out, okay, well, I have a client that has these facts. What is the best answer for them? So that really is all that this learning goal is thinking about. And you will learn these skills in this course and in the courses as you go through the program, but be thoughtful about, okay, so what is the process that I'm going through to either do the research or write my answer? And then you'll see that a lot of the critical thinking goal objectives are mirrored in that process. Okay, your second goal here is research skills. And this one is particularly relevant for this course because we're going to talk about how you do tax research. So the objectives here is that you will be able to use primary resources, so primary tax databases, statutes, regulations, case law, to address federal, state, local, and international tax issues. So, we're going to focus in this course principally on federal personal income tax because I think that people come into this program with a lot of different backgrounds in tax. Some people have had no tax classes and some people have had overview classes. Other people may have been working in the field for quite a while and may have, very deep knowledge in certain areas. So we're going to focus on personal income tax, but we'll talk about other resources that exist, and a lot of the tools that you'll use in this course will be useful in other courses as you are, figuring out what answers are and reviewing problems posed in those questions. Okay. So the second objective here is that you'll be able to interpret and apply tax authority. What does the law say? You will be doing your own research, but you have to then read it and say, okay, well, based on based on the research that I've done, here's what the law that I've been able to find in this topic area is. And so, you'll interpret it, you'll figure out, okay, this is relevant, this is not relevant for these reasons. And then the third objective is that you'll be able to take the facts and the client's facts and apply the law to the client's facts and figure out what the answer is. So you're going to be able to analyze the research that you've been able to gather in the first two steps. Okay. You should always assume when you are taking a course, when you are presenting information to anybody in this program or going forward in your professional lives, that you should have support for conclusions that you are presenting to your audience. So if, for example, you have been asked to do a tax memo or asked to do a tax analysis in some context, you should be able to say, okay, well, here's what the client's facts are. Here's what the law is. Here is the law applied to the client's facts. And here's what I think the client should do and why. And within the context of that law and within the context of your analysis, you should have references. You should be able to say, here is what I'm basing my conclusions on. Because we don't make stuff up. I mean, sometimes we have to extrapolate answers from the facts we have. Sometimes we have to extrapolate what the law is going to be, what a court is likely to do, if there's not a case on point. But, for the most part, we're able to cite to something that supports the answer that we're giving to a client. So you should always assume that you have to interpret and apply tax authority. Whenever you're given a chance to do so, and then say, what are we basing this on? This learning goal, this technical tax communication, is one of the things that I think will be more courses than just this one are going to focus on this, because there is a lot of law and a lot of process that you have to understand as a practicing accountant or as a practicing lawyer. Some people go from this program to law school, and the idea is that you're going to demonstrate you understand what the tax law is, and that you can understand, more importantly, the policy behind the law. So when you're sitting and trying to explain to a client, why is this the way it is, because that comes up an awful lot, because a lot of this can be nonsensical to clients. Like, they don't really understand why they have to do the things that they're being asked to do by the government. And so you can say, well, here is what the bigger policy issue is, and here's how they chose to address it, and your facts apply or don't apply in this circumstance. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about this, but again, this isn't the technical tax learning goal. Is the something you're going to talk about in a lot of other classes. We're going to talk about how to communicate what that is, and how to communicate complex tax concepts in ways that clients would be able to understand them. I always say when I'm working with our new associates that you should be able to say, okay, we've done this memo, but could my mother read it and understand what's being communicated? Because we really do our clients a disservice if we don't communicate complexity in simple ways. So along those lines, the fourth and final learning goal that we'll focus on in this course is business communication. So the idea is that you're able to communicate complex information to a variety of stakeholders so that you can increase their knowledge and achieve objectives. People take in information in a lot of different ways, okay? So, when we're dealing with the CEO of a company who may be a smart person but may not be a tax person, we're going to have a different style of writing potentially than when we communicate with the controller of the company, who may be more of a finance person, who may be a tax person, who may understand that okay, well, these abbreviations mean these other things, right? And we'll talk about how to do that information, how to consider your audience, and how to present information in a way that your audience will actually understand them. So the objectives here are to be able to identify what the central message of your communication is and present that in a clear, concise, and convincing manner. You will use evidence with credible and reliable, relevant sources to support your central message or credibility of your message, your credibility. And then again, we're going to articulate complex information in a way that allows relevant stakeholders to understand that message. This is not a very well written objective because it has a lot of passive voice, so it's difficult to know what you're supposed to do here. But essentially, we're breaking down complexity, we're presenting information in a way that a client will understand it, and then we are helping them move forward with their business objectives. Okay, so the idea here is that this course will introduce the need to use evidence in tax communications, as well as discussing the need to state complex tax information in an easily understood manner. So these 4 learning goals are things that I'm going to focus on when I give you feedback, and I'm going to say, do you think that you met these criteria? So you can expect to see feedback along these lines in addition to using the sources and the answering the question correctly. So because this is your first opportunity to practice it, and you will be evaluated on this at the end of the program. Okay. So how is this course going to work? So this course is going to work essentially over the internet. I'm going to record lectures every week, typically on Sunday. And then I am going to write the quiz and the homework, and I'm going to post them for you on Monday mornings. So you'll be receiving this course, this lecture, the homework, slides, and anything else that I think is relevant for this course or this lecture on Monday morning, which will be June 20th, 2022. Okay, so that's the live lectures or the recorded lectures. I have them hosted on YouTube so that you can I can bookmark within the video so that you can say, okay, I want to stop now, but I'm going to go listen to this other part of the lecture later. I think YouTube also allows you to have subtitles. It allows you to listen to things faster or slower than I'm recording them. And so hopefully that will work. I will say that the lectures for the first 4 weeks of the course are longer than the lectures for the last 4 weeks of the course, because what we will be talking about in the first 4 weeks of the course is how to do research. We'll be focusing on writing a little bit more and you doing your own research in the second half of the course. So the first half of the course is all closed universe, which means that you will have writing assignments, but I will give you the law and the tools that you need to answer the question. And in the second half of the course, you will be focusing less on lectures, although we'll still have lectures, and we'll be focusing more on you going out and doing the research yourself. Okay. So that's what the recorded lectures are going to be. And then we'll also have a live office hour once a week on Tuesdays from 6:30 to 7:30, although there's one week that I know of, which I think I put in the announcements, where we won't have an office hour, or I will maybe find another time for it. So let me know if that time doesn't work for you, or if it doesn't work for more than half the class, then we'll try and find something else. When you attend the office hour, I prefer that you keep the video on because it makes things more interactive. I know we're in an era of anonymous Zoom, but it's much friendlier. I mean, the office hours tend to be mostly communications about how things are going. It's a great opportunity for you to let me know if the computer choked on something, if I did something wrong in Canvas, which obviously I forgot to turn on, didn't realize that I had to turn on the course ahead of the start date of the course. And then, if there are, so it's a good opportunity for you to just communicate with me and me to communicate with you. But you should never assume that you have to attend the office hours. So, there's no pre-scripted material. There's no new information that you're going to get or that you should get. The function is really to provide a way for you to ask questions about the course and about the homework, about an assignment, and then for me to answer that. So, feel free to show up if you want. If you don't want to show up, that's okay too. If you need to meet at a time outside of that, or if you have a question that requires some privacy, go ahead and shoot me an email and we'll get something on the calendar. Okay, Canvas. So Canvas is the relatively new online thing that basically we are running all of our courses through now. There used to be a program called D2L that we used, and they're basically the same. It's just how to do things is a little bit different on the back end and probably different as a user. So how I use Canvas is I will post announcements about things that change, or if there's scheduling issues, if there are any updates that I need to give you, I'll put an announcement in Canvas. I believe it puts a little notification on the course itself when there's an update. So just keep those front of mind. I post all the course materials for each course in Canvas, and that includes slides, videos, reading assignments. I took all of the book assignments out of the syllabus because I'm not requiring a textbook this term. So let me know how that goes, if that works for you, if that doesn't work for you, if you prefer to have a textbook, let me know. There's not really a great textbook for this class. And the number one criticism that I got from students when I've taught this before is that the textbook is kind of expensive and not that useful. So we'll see how this goes, because I don't think we need it. But if you need other resources or if you're getting lost, definitely let me know. On the home page, there are going to be links to the office hours Zoom sessions, so those Tuesday night sessions. There is a password required to get into it, and that is MTAX 525, which I put in the announcement for the first announcement. So you should be able to just click through to do that. You can't get into the sessions if you don't have the link, so you have to be in Canvas and then click through, or it doesn't work properly. So the other thing is that you'll see, I don't really use discussion fields. In this course, I don't think it's particularly helpful. I know people have set up Discord things for this course in the past, but that's something that's student run, and I don't moderate or advocate for or against. I do post the assignments for each week in, there's a link to it in the module, but there will also be, the assignment will be under the assignment section. So if you can't find it, look for the assignment under assignments. There's an assignment for every week. There's also a quiz for every week. So go and look at the quiz, because there's a quiz for this week. Go look at the quizzes that are listed under quizzes and take your quiz. We'll talk about that in just a sec. And then finally, you can see your grades. So you should be able to see your grades. When I post the graded assignments, it will show up in your grade section. And when the quiz auto grades itself, because they're all multiple choice, true, false, that will show up in your grade as well. So you should be able to just click through and see what your grade is. The syllabus for this course, I've already had to update it because I found a math error after I sent it to you. But the syllabus for this course will be under the first module, which is the basic tax course information. And I have an image of that module here on the right side of the slide, because I thought it would be useful to sort of explain what the different basic course informations are. The syllabus contains basic course information, requirements and expectations, how grading works, and a roadmap for the course. I like the roadmap because when I was a student, it helped me understand, okay, well, here's where we're going, and here's what we're doing right now fits into the bigger picture of where we're going. Okay. Under basic course information, you'll find the syllabus, and it will always be the most current version of the syllabus, and it will have a revision date, so you can know that it's the most current version. You'll also find templates. So I want you to use these Word document templates when you are doing your homework for this course. So there's an email template, a letter template, and a memo template. And the reason that I want you to use templates is because I think that it is important that you know how to use a template, and that you upload your finished work to the assignment, and it allows me to say, okay, and so for example, this week's homework is an email, okay? You could send me an email, but I don't want you to. I want you to use the email template to do that. Because if you send me an email, which you should not do for your homework, it doesn't exist within Canvas. And so I can't give you feedback in the same way that I can if it's within Canvas. And will email it back to you and say, submit your email using the template in Canvas. So use the templates, upload them to the assignment. If you've got questions about how to do that, let me know. But it allows me to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges and to give you feedback on how to be a better writer. Okay. The other thing that I have under this basic course information is links to certain things. The AICPA online ethics page and Circular 230 landing page at the IRS are both ethical tools. So we're going to talk about ethical rules and certain ethical concepts as we go through the course. We won't necessarily have one every week, but there will be something. And then one of the things that I think will be very helpful, and I encourage you to do, Portland State University gets a Grammarly, which is a software program, license for all of their students, and you just have to request it and say, I would like to have the access to this program. It will proofread your writing for you, and I strongly encourage you to do this because it will prevent you from making kind of thoughtless mistakes. A lot of us, like myself included, when we write things, it looks correct. And we may have bad grammar, we may have bad punctuation, and what Grammarly does is it is basically an online proofing tool. It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than submitting things with spelling errors or, easy punctuation errors. Okay. There's also a link to the PSU Tax Library, and the PSU Tax Library has great databases and website links. You should have already received access to, I think it's BNA. And then the checkpoint, which we will also be talking about, is linked within that web page. So we'll talk more about that when we talk about the research tool. But just know that a way to access those tools is going to be in this first module. So you don't have to go digging for it every time that you have a question on how to do the research, which we'll be talking about as we go through the course. Okay. So assignments, we talked about assignments, and here's how your grade's going to be sorted out. Your quizzes are going to be 5 points each, and so 8 weeks, so it's 40, 5 times 8 is 40. So they're 20% of your final grade. And if you look, you'll see that, the total points value should add up to 100. And your final grade, points should add up to 200. Your final grade should add up to 100. And so this is how you are going to get your grade in this course. Okay. So you're going to have 8 different writing assignments. You'll have one every week, including this week. You'll have a quiz every week, including this week. Do not assume, as certain students have in the past, that there is no quiz on some week. There is going to be a quiz every week, so don't forget to take it. It's easy to forget, and you will have cost yourself 5 points of the 200 or 2.5 grade points. Okay. So grading, I need you to submit your assignments and quizzes on time. Okay. All assignments must be completed, and if you have a special thing through the Learning Center at PSU, that's fine, and I will take that into account. But if you do not, you need to submit everything on time. Because the class is taught asynchronously, it means that if an assignment is due on a holiday weekend, it is still due. You can submit anything early, just can't submit it late. So don't submit quizzes late. The assignments, so quizzes shouldn't, and we'll talk more about them, but the quizzes really should not take more than 45 minutes. But there is one every week. I took the time limit off of the quizzes, but they're only 5 questions, and they're based on the things that we talk about in the lectures. So I only say that they should not take more than 45 minutes because I don't want people to be stressing about them. They're not designed to be difficult. They're designed as a check-in on people's engagement with the course. So, and then as far as assignments go, you can submit any assignment up to 7 days late without an explanation. Late submitted assignments within that 7-day window. So if you're submitting anything late, you can receive, you get a 50% reduction. So let's say the assignment for week 2 is worth 10 points and is due on July 3rd by midnight, or whenever it's due by midnight. If you submit it late on July 5th at any time and would otherwise have received 10 points, they will receive 5 points. No credit's going to be given for assignments submitted after 7 days without plausible explanation. If you know that you are having some sort of medical crisis, this has happened a couple of times in the last couple of years. If you know that there's some sort of medical crisis or some sort of other legitimate emergency where you are going to be unable to submit your assignment on time, let me know before the deadline. I cannot do things if you do not let me know before the deadline. So that's important, okay? Other reductions, if you spell my name, the client's name, or any other name in the assignment incorrectly, you're going to receive a 10% reduction in your grade for that assignment. So if you would have received 10 points, you will receive a 1-point reduction. If it's 20 points, I will subtract 2 points. Similarly, if there's really horrendous spelling, punctuation, or grammar, you're going to receive a 5% reduction in your grade for that assignment. So please use Grammarly. It's a really great tool to help you avoid that 5% reduction. Okay, grading. This is in the syllabus. This is just the chart that I use for when I'm trying to figure out how to translate your point grade to a letter grade, which is how PSU submits, how PSU likes their answers to grades to be presented. So they don't have an A+, which is weird to me, but they have A's through F. People tend to do quite well in this course, but it does require a certain amount of work. Okay, research tools. So the different research tools that we're going to talk about are RIA Checkpoint, and Westlaw, LexisNexis, Bloomberg Tax, and CCH. So I don't think you've got access to Westlaw, LexisNexis, or CCH, but we'll talk about them. Bloomberg Tax, you need to have access to, you should have access to. If you don't, let me know. You need to have that account set up. It will be important. When I think of research tools, I think about whether I can put just a query into a search bar and have it come up with the answer, or if I have to explore through a research tool, so drill down into the different levels of the research tool to figure out the answer. Checkpoint tends to be a keyword type answer tool. Bloomberg tends to be more of an exploration tool. So we'll talk about how to use those tools differently as we go through, but just know that these are the tools that we'll be looking at in the course. Now, I put a link here, but the link is also in the materials. In that first module, we have that link to the PSU tax library. Writing tools. Please use correct grammar. And this is just another plug for the Grammarly premium account service that you can use. And then here is some of the punctuation rules that I find particularly important that we will talk about as we go through. Okay, ethics tools. So we talked about Circular 230 and the AICPA tools a little bit when we talked about where they exist within that basic course information module. And we're going to use these two different ethical research tools as we move through the course. Just know that they exist for this purpose for right now, and that Circular 230 is a set of standards that IRS requires compliance with for people to practice before the IRS. So we practice before the IRS in a variety of different ways, and we'll talk about what practice for the IRS means. But because we do that, we have to be compliant with the rules in Circular 230. AICPA rules are more rules that state regulatory authorities require you to comply with. There are locally adopted versions and variations, but just know that these tools are in the course materials in Module 1, and we'll talk more about them as we go through the course. Okay, as I mentioned, we've had students that have had significant issues, and of all kinds of different challenges and life challenges. I think, with the pandemic and with us being fully remote and sort of the isolation issues that we've all been enduring, a lot of things have been going off the rails. And so know that we are here to support you. Okay. So if you're having issues, like I said, if you're going to not be able to meet a deadline and you know it, and there's a crisis going on, just shoot me an email before the deadline. If you're having issues, though, that have an impact on your health, well-being, or ability to engage with schoolwork, because, we are not just students. You are not just students, right? So you are people first, and there are lots of things that can be going on in your life. Or if you need someone to connect you with PSU resources, Nancy Young, who's the academic advisor for the business programs, is a great resource. And you can reach Nancy at sbagradadvising@pdx.edu. You can call her, and her phone number is here, and I put her contact information in the syllabus. So other PSU resources exist for when your life goes sideways. So there are legal resources. They have lawyers for PSU students. And so a lot of times where I've seen students need help from the PSU lawyers, lawyer support, is with landlord-tenant issues. So if you're having a housing issue with your landlord or something like that, they can help. Sexual assault resources. There are really great support resources out there for victims of sexual assault. Unfortunately, I've had students in the program that have had to use these resources, and just know that they're really great about finding compassionate solutions that will allow students to recover from an assault and still move forward successfully with their academic career. It's life intervenes in terrible ways sometimes. And then, there are unfortunately a lot of financial crises that students have been enduring. So there are financial crisis resources out there, and the Dean of Student Life webpage has a lot of that information. So, know that we and I, acknowledge that you are a person first and a student second. So you can't be a student unless you're taking care of yourself as a person. So let's just, these are resources out there, but if you need anything, or if you're not going to meet a deadline, if something happens, just let me know. Okay, so let's talk about the substantive part of our course, which is essentially divided. Most of the lectures are going to be divided into these three categories, now that we've gotten through the sort of introductory stuff. So tax research, writing, and then circular 230 or generalized ethics issues. Today we're going to do an overview of tax resources and talk about sources of authority. In our writing unit, we'll be talking about why do we write, and we'll talk about appropriate use of the comma, and then we'll talk about electronic mail. Finally, we'll talk about circular 230 and what is the Office of Professional Responsibility. Okay, so these are the three areas that we're going to be talking about substantively today. So tax research, why bother? Okay, so why bother doing research? You could just make up an answer and the client would probably buy it. But, one of the cardinal rules of tax research is you shall not wing it. I had a professor when I was in the LLM program at University of Washington who taught the partnership tax class. And he said, a client calls and they have a question for you and you don't know the answer. What do you do? And the correct answer to that question is you say, I don't know the answer. Or you say, this is my off-the-cuff answer, and let me get back to you on what the correct answer is. Because his theory was that you just wing it, and there's never a good answer. So, to this day, there are people that I had that class with who, we joke about this when we get together. So don't wing it. If you do have to wing it, say, this is my gut level feeling on this, but let me confirm that for you. Clients respect the fact that this is a complex area and they want to know what the right answer is. So what tax research is how you figure out the answers to tax questions. And you will get better at it if as you practice it, as you go through the process of doing research, as you go through the process of analyzing tax problems, because nobody knows how to do this just starting out. Okay. It may seem like people know how to do it just starting out, or it may seem that it's intuitive for some people, but it's really not. Okay, so how are we going to approach learning about tax research in this course? I'm a lawyer, and so we're going to understand it by understanding where the law comes from and how different parts of the law can be used to find the answer for your client. Okay, so we're going to start with talking about the research process and what does the research process even look like. I think that a lot of times when people who don't do this professionally think about research in general, they think, oh, you just go and figure out the answer. But if you don't have a process, you don't know how to do that, and you're just flailing around in front of your computer, not making any progress. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to efficiently make progress in answering client questions. You answer client questions by figuring out what the rules are, right? So you say, okay, well, here's your question, here's your facts. What are the rules that govern your facts? So how do you find them? We're going to talk about statutes, regulations, and cases, which are the three major sort of primary areas of tax law. That primary versus secondary is a little bit squidgy. And so we'll talk about that and why I think that is. And then we'll talk about administrative guidance, which is basically what the revenue agencies have said about statutes, regulations, and cases. And then we'll talk about third-party analyses, which are, treatises, they're law firm white papers, they're, different things that exist that smart people have written to try and analyze statutes, regulations, cases, and administrative guidance. Okay. But you have to know the limitations of these tools too. So we're going to talk about when you can rely on them, when you can't rely on them, what they're good for, what you may not be able to use them for. There are two areas of law we'll talk about if we've got time, where there are specialized tools, and those are in the areas of state tax and international tax. And that's because they're both jurisdictional tax issues or tax areas. And then finally, and this gets to the analysis part of our learning objectives. What do you do if the authority conflicts with each other? What do you do if the law doesn't agree? And so we'll talk about how to resolve that kind of dispute, that kind of conflict. Okay, so tax research process. And the research process is not linear, okay? I think there's the idea that you do one thing and then do another thing and then you do the final thing. And that's not the way it works. So you start out by saying, okay, what are the client's facts? You establish the client's facts and you say, okay, I know what the facts are, so I think that this is what the issue is. And what an issue is the question that you're trying to answer. So you have your facts and you have your question that you're trying to answer using the facts in the law. And so you have to figure out what is the relevant authority that may help you answer this question. At any point in this process, you may have to go back and get more facts, right? Because you may say, oh, okay, there's this issue that I need to answer, and I don't have all the facts that I need. And so that's why the diagram on the right is not just arrows headed down, it's arrows that may go back up and may go back, so when you locate and you evaluate authority in steps 3 and 4, it may say, oh, there's a test. There's a 3-part test that I have to evaluate, and I don't know what the facts are for this client related to the second part of that test. So I need to go back and ask the client. So you get more facts. And so then you can go back and figure out, okay, that's how I answer this question. Okay, so once you have all the facts and you know what all the law says and you have all the law available in the area, then you apply the law to the facts, you develop your conclusions and recommendations, and then only afterwards do you communicate the recommendations to the client. Now, I generally will start my writing when I'm starting the facts, establishing what the facts are, because it's very difficult to hold all this stuff in my head. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. Okay. So what are the relevant facts? So what does relevant even mean? Relevant is something that has a significant and demonstrable bearing on the matter at hand. It means that it is the thing that you want to focus on when you are answering the question. So how do you get relevant facts from a client? You can ask them questions, but you don't want to necessarily be harassing the client as you're going through doing your research. Say, oh, I know I need this fact, and you circle back. So what you will do is you will aggregate your questions and you will go back and ask them all at once. But I think if you attend meetings with more experienced practitioners, one of the things that they do, because they have a lot of the understanding of the law in their heads, is they can draw out the relevant facts from the client. So they'll say, oh, I think there's this issue, so let me ask you the questions about the facts that I know are relevant. So there's also I think it's good to see how people do this, because there's really an art to asking those questions. So there's another tip that I have for you is don't focus only on tax facts when you're talking about clients, because that's often not what they care about most. We see this all the time in the estate planning area and the estate tax area, where really what they're worried about is their family. In the business context, what they worried about is their business. They're worried about their bottom line. And I think it's difficult sometimes for accountants and tax attorneys to set aside our belief that the tax question is the most interesting question, because, we have to know what the tax answer is, but we also have to know what the client cares about. As I mentioned, when I'm starting a new research project, what I'll often do is I'll often develop, have a piece of paper, or I'll have a Word document open, and I'll just list out. I'll do a brain dump of all of the client's facts, and then we'll sort out what's relevant later. Because you're not going to know what's relevant until you know what the law thinks is important. So when you're doing the initial brain dump of the client's facts, into that document, be objective and just put them all in there, and then you can sort them out and organize them later. But it allows you to have a landing place so you don't have to keep everything in your head. Okay, so issues. The issues are just the question that you're trying to answer. So if you look at what the definition of an issue is, it's a vital or unsettled matter. So when we're thinking about issues in the research process, we're thinking about what question does the client think they want you to answer? And then are there any other questions that you need to answer? There are usually other questions that are relevant to figuring out how to advise the client, because the client only knows what the problem is in front of them. They don't know what the problem down the road is. And so our job, as tax advisors, is to say, yes, you could do that, but this will create all these other issues that you could avoid if you go this other route. So, as far as presenting alternatives to clients, we need to be able to see maybe 2 or 3 steps down the road where clients only focus on the thing that's right in front of them. Okay, authority. What is authority? And, I say that these distinctions of primary and secondary are pretty squidgy, in the sense that it's all important, but there are certain things that we give more weight to. So if you say primary authorities, Constitution, statutes, and treatises, that is what the law is. Okay. Where I have the bucket of secondary authority are people saying, okay, we are going to interpret what the law is as it applies in these circumstances. So that's the things that courts and tribunals will come up with, judicial opinions that are either precedential, meaning that you can rely on them, or not precedential. You can't rely on them, but they might persuade a judge or a trier of fact who's looking at it. And then there's things that are precedential but not precedential, may be persuasive, and that may be opinions of courts in other jurisdictions. We'll talk about the distinctions of that next week or the week after. Agency guidance. So, when we have our agency guidance, we have our administrative regulations and we have other agency guidance. And these are things where the agency has said, we are the IRS and we believe that this statute, this section of the Internal Revenue Code, should be interpreted this way. And so that's what agency guidance is. And then we have third-party analysis. So those are things like research tool explanations, treatises, law firm white papers you find using amazing Google skills, a CLE or CPE presentation that you attended. Third-party analysis also includes the situation where you go home for Thanksgiving or you go to a party and somebody's uncle's friend had a really similar experience and wants to tell you about it. It's basically where smart people are analyzing the other 2 buckets. Okay. And how I think about this is, the legislature or the founding fathers say this is the law. Here's the interpretation and application of what the legislature said is the law. And then the third-party analysis, as I said, just some smart person somewhere doing analysis that is, may be helpful or may not be helpful. When we think about what should we rely on, because that's, if you have conflicts, you may have conflicts, between these different buckets. So the primary authority, the constitutes, statutes, and treatises are binding, though that is the law. And so they don't need as much skepticism, because you're going to have to work with whatever it says. And then all the way through to third-party analyses, which is not binding, and you need more skepticism when you're trying to figure out how useful they actually are. I find sometimes with this course that people will print out these research tool explanations with the idea that they are binding or authoritative. Don't ever cite a research tool to me in this course. You can use them to try and figure out what the answer is, but no trier of fact is going to be bound by them. So, they're useful, and we'll talk more about how you use them when we go through, but they're not binding on anything, and you have to be skeptical of them. And I have found ones that are wrong. Okay, so, we have our research process. We're going to talk now about this first bucket, so this primary authority bucket, the Constitution, statutes, and treatises. The constitutions, let me clarify, are basically the things that describe how government works and describe what someone's constitutional rights are, right? So the federal Constitution sets out the structure of government. It says, okay, here are the three branches of government, and those are, Congress, the executive, and the judicial, so legislative, executive, and judicial. It talks about the relationships of the states to each other, because there's sub-jurisdictions within the larger United States. It talks about how you amend the Constitution, because, the founder and fathers acknowledge that there might be typos and things like that and need to be fixed. And then it has what we call the Supremacy Clause. And this is important for tax purposes, because in an area that is where the federal courts or the federal statutes exist, the Supremacy Clause means that if it is in conflict with a lower jurisdiction's law, so if, for example, there's a state law in conflict, then the federal law will win. Okay? The Constitution also imposes limits on governmental authority, including its ability to tax, and that's also very important. So, so the federal Constitution is vague, so it's not going to talk about specific situations in tax area, but it is very important. And so if there is something on point, relevant within the federal Constitution, it will govern how you answer the question. Now, other types of jurisdictions have constitutions as well, and I think people forget about these. But the state constitutions and the tribal constitutions exist. Many of them also have limitations on governmental authority that will apply to state revenue authorities. So, for example, the Oregon First Amendment, the Oregon individuals have a free speech right that is actually broader than what is allowed in the federal Constitution. And so interpretations of state law will actually have a significant impact on how your client's business fares on the different issues that are implicated within that Constitution. So if there's a constitutional issue, make sure that you evaluate it under not only the federal Constitution, but any applicable state or tribal constitutions. So, you really do need to figure out, what type of government are we worried about acting here? We see this when we're dealing with non-compliant taxpayers, so taxpayers who have not filed tax returns for various reasons, and they have the state, so they won't file federal returns, and that's the one that everybody cares about. But the state also will come after them because they haven't been filing state returns either. And so often you're dealing with different types of jurisdiction at the same time. Okay. So the one level lower than the Constitution are the statutes. And the federal statutes, this is the law, okay? So federal statutes are codified in what we call the United States Code. So most tax laws are contained in the Internal Revenue Code, which we abbreviate as IRC, which is actually Title 26 of the U.S. Code. So when you see federal tax statutes, you will see them as IRC Section 61, whatever. But that same statute, IRC 61, you could also cite in a memo or in some other form of tax communication as 26 USC Section 61. Now, accountants and tax lawyers tend to use the IRC citation because it's easier, faster than writing out the whole 26 USC, and we know what we're talking about. But, just know that other folks may refer to the federal tax statutes as, 26 USC Section 61 or whatever the section is. Okay. There are other sections of the United States Code that can have an impact on tax questions. For example, the bankruptcy code that exists at Title 21, not Title 26 of the U.S. Code. Statutes, if they are in conflict with the Constitution, can be overturned. So if the statute's wrong, then we look to if it's wrong relative to the Constitution. So when you hear about a court determining that a statute is unconstitutional and overruling it, that's what happens, is that there's a conflict between the two and the Constitution is always going to win. Okay. I am going to play this little video from Schoolhouse Rock, which I love, talking about where statutes come from. Now, I'm also, throughout the course, I'm going to have some embedded videos in the lectures, but I will also post a link because I know that some of you listen to these lectures on your phone, and so it may be easier for you to see what's going on in the video, particularly when we get to some of the research videos, if you just watch them in their native form. So I am going to put a link in a bookmark here. And so you can just skip to this video or skip to the end of it. Okay.
Woo, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So that is the Schoolhouse Rock version of how a bill becomes a law. So what we care about are the laws, although sometimes we'll look at proposals, which is that the bill that Congress will put forward. A lot of times when we're looking at proposed law changes, what you'll see a lot of smart people analyzing proposals so that we can be prepared to advise clients if it does in fact become a law. But, a lot of things don't become laws. Okay, so administrative regulation. So after the legislature creates a law, so it enacts a law, and Congress passes it, the executive branch signs it, it is codified, which we call putting it into the code, means we're codifying it. Administrative agencies, and here we care about the Treasury Department, the Internal Revenue Service, which is under the Treasury Department, the Department of Revenue, if we're talking about different state agencies, must figure out how to make it work. So the processes that they have to follow are contained within the Administrative Procedures Act. The legislature typically will delegate the authority to agencies to draft regulations, which are, the agency's interpretation of how to make things work. What's interesting about this is that administrative agencies are typically part of the executive branch of government. And so what you have here is you have all three branches making law, essentially. And we'll talk about judicial opinions on the next slide. So regulations get a lot of deference. There are different types of regulations, though. So there are procedural regulations, which is, the implementation, how to do things. But then you also have the substantive regulations. So these are like additional statutes. And, what you'll find there's a lot of times, particularly in the area of tax, because it's complicated and legislators don't always understand what they're doing. But they will delegate the authority. So they'll say, here's what our policy is, but they won't fill in the details of that. And so the details are the what regulations. And so those are substantive regulations. And we'll talk more about both of these buckets later. Okay, so judicial opinions, and of course we'll talk again more about this, but there are different levels of court. And the top of the food chain on the federal court side is the Supreme Court, and then we have the Court of Appeals for different districts, and then we have district courts and tax court. And they will say the district courts and tax courts typically will figure out, they're what we call the trier of fact. They'll figure out, what are the facts in the case, and then, what is the relevant law, and then apply the law to the facts and come up with an answer. Courts of appeals will typically focus on the legal issue more than what the specific facts are. So did the district court or the tax court or whomever interpret the law correctly relative to the facts, as opposed to trying to create a list of what the facts are in the first place. So, and then again, the Supreme Court will care mostly about the law. State courts, have sort of similar structures. In the Supreme Court, there's the Supreme Court in most states, and courts of appeals that are appellate courts. And then you'll have your district courts or your tax court that will be used to figure out what the facts are. And then you have, feeding into those administrative agency decisions. So, so what we have talked about is the three branches of government, essentially. And then they all have a way of generating law and generating law with the lowercase l, although only the legislature comes up with statutes, which is the technical law, which is why I view it as being more of a primary source, and then everything after that is interpretation. Okay, so in your research process, you're trying to figure out, what is the applicable law? Are there statutes on point? Are there interpretive guidance from the agencies or courts? And if so, then, what does the applicable law say about your issue that you care about, or your client cares about, and the facts that you care about? You have to be sure that you're always using the most current version of the applicable law, because I think people get sideways sometimes when they, find for example, a statute they really like. And we'll talk more about this next week. But IRS doesn't always have the ability to change things. So if you find a statute or a regulation you really like, you have to make sure that it's the current version. If you find a case that you really think supports your client's facts, it may have been overruled. So you need to be able to figure out, well, how do I know if this is still good law? So your research process, again, looks at the facts, the issues, the facts, which are what's going on with your client. The issue is, what is the question you're trying to answer? The applicable authority and the applicable law applying, what is the law in this area that we care about? And then you think about analysis. Now, one of the acronyms that you'll see sometimes in this area when we talk about analysis is IRAC. And what this stands for is Issue, Rule, Analysis, Conclusion. Issue, Rule, Analysis, Conclusion. And IRAC is a really useful model when you're thinking about research, because it gives you the major steps, and if you're missing one, then you have a problem. It's also really helpful when you're thinking about writing, because when you are trying to communicate information, you say, what is the question we're trying to answer? What is the rule? What is the law that's applicable? What is my analysis? And then what is my conclusion? Okay, so keep that in mind as we go into tax writing in the next section. Okay, and then you have your conclusions that you present as as the sort of the end product of your research, and then you got to figure out how to communicate that with your client. Okay, so tax writing. Tax writing is the second major subject area that we're going to talk about here. Tax writing, I think it's really helpful if you think about tax writing as formal writing. We have the structure that we just talked about that, is intended to keep you organized. It's not intended to be overly formal. It's not intended to, say, make things more complicated for your clients. It's just intended to make sure you don't miss things. So, it establishes the facts that you considered in your analysis. It states and answers your client's question. It describes the applicable law, and it comes to a detailed conclusion. Okay. So why do we write stuff down? Why can't we just have a phone call with our client and say, hey, I did some research. I found this statute. It's great. It helps. It answers your question. Here's what the number of that statute is. Here's the name of the case that you care about. Go forth and do. Okay. Tax writing, you have to write things down because it helps you stay organized and not miss a step and not miss a case. Also, when you win the lottery at 35 years of age and retire to whatever your dream retirement is the very next day, the person who picks up this file needs to know what you told your client and why you told them that. The issue of work papers, I think, is very, very important when you're talking about tax returns, but it's also very important when you're talking about your research. And so you, as the person who's maybe left behind when someone else retires, need to be able to, let's say a return gets pulled for audit, you need to be able to understand why they took the return position they did, or why they chose to do the business thing that they chose to do on the advice of the accountant that, told them to do the things. The other reason you do tax writing is risk management. It's to protect yourself. So clients can have really convenient memories of the things that you did say or didn't say, and reliance on the advice of a paid preparer can save them a lot of money. It's one of the grounds that IRS uses to abate penalties. So if you give them bad advice and they do things that consistent with that advice, then they can typically get out of penalties. If IRS chooses to not waive those penalties, then it can cost your malpractice carrier a lot of money. It's figuring out the answer to the issue. So, so it's important to document these things, and it's important to document what the client reacted to, what the client said they would do in response to what you told them to do. Because a lot of times well, not a lot of times, but if you have a client who doesn't like the answer that you give them, it's even more important to document what you told them, because they may go ahead and do whatever they wanted to do. And then come back and say, oh, you said I could do this. You said, no, this is what I told you to do. We had a situation when I was in public accounting about, we had a client who owned pieces of machinery all over the country. It was something that they supplied because they were really in the business selling consumables, but this piece of machinery helped process the consumable. And so they had it at customer sites in 50 states, and multiple places within those states. And I said, you really need to consider whether you have state tax filing obligations as a result of owning this piece of equipment that you're lending to your clients, customers in all these states. And they said, no, we're not going to deal with that. So 2 years later, they were being acquired, and this issue came up on due diligence, which is basically when the acquiring business will take a look at the business that is being acquired and say, what is the risk? Are they doing things wrong? Are they filing returns wrong? And they came up with this issue as well they should, saying that, they should have been filing tax returns in all these states because they own stuff in all these states. And the client said, oh, you didn't tell us, tax person at KPMG, about this issue? I said, no, here is the memo that we sent you on this issue, and here is the email sending it to you. We did tell you about this issue. So, so it can come up, and it's just important to be defensive and document the advice that you give, even if your client's not going to follow it, because it protects you, and it's just a good practice to get into. Okay, electronic mail. There's types of writing that we're going to talk about in this class. Okay, so we talked about the templates, and electronic mail is the bane of my existence. I think I probably have 30,000 emails in my inbox right now at work because I search them. And so it's an effective way for me to manage my email, but it stresses other people out when they look at it. It is the single most common form of written communication these days, though. So we're going to talk about what emails are and how to write them, and how to use them and when not to use them. Letters are the second most common form of communication. There are different types of letters. So you can have a letter that is just basically a cover sheet that sends stuff out to a client, or it can be a more substantive document. So we're going to talk, when we talk about letters, we're going to talk about how you can have a lot of the elements in a formal memo show up in a letter. Okay, letters are seen as friendlier and more interactive than memoranda, and people are more likely to read them. So, but they also may not be the best tool if you have a really complicated piece of analysis to present to a client. Okay, and then we talk about memoranda. So memoranda a memo is what we use to document our tax research and how our research, the law that our research developed, and the conclusions that we are drawing based on the facts in the research. Okay, it's more analytical usually than a letter, certainly more analytical than an email, and formal, and they can be long. And we'll talk about how to still use them to communicate with clients, because a lot of times clients barely read emails, and so how can we help them read our memoranda? And then finally, we'll talk about tax opinions. So what a tax opinion is it's something that is used to justify a tax position in case the revenue agency challenges that position. They can be expensive. They're basically a fancier version of a memoranda. And so what a tax opinion is basically saying, here is my conclusion, and here is how confident I am in that conclusion. Okay, because you're essentially pledging your malpractice insurance that you're right. And so tends to be more hurdles that we go through when we're issuing opinions. And so I want to make sure that you understand how they're used. Sometimes CPAs will write them. A lot of times lawyers will write them. And they are basically get out of penalties cards because clients can use them to abate penalties. Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about when you would use when you would use different types of communication and who your audience is. And we'll talk about this as we go through this course, but I want you to keep in mind who your audience is and what are they going to use the information for. Okay. If you have a tax colleague, or if you're just trying to document something that you're communicating with the file, what you're presenting is you're presenting your formal balanced analysis of the client facts for documentation purposes. So this is the most common form of just work paper memo. I will sometimes do memoranda to the file just to put the client's facts down in writing somewhere. We do this for a lot of our planning clients because they'll come in and we'll get started on a transaction and we won't have necessarily a strict issue that we're looking at, but we get a lot of information in that first communication with them. And so it's a way for us to ensure that the file is up to date, and if we win the lottery and retire, that someone who picks up the file can move forward with that client. If you're communicating with your client, you should think of them as someone who pays a lot of money for you to get the answer right. Okay. So, but within the client, you may have different audiences. You may have, for example, the tax director. The tax director of a company, again, will probably want a more standard memoranda format. It should be formal. It should be balanced. It should not be a persuasive piece. It should say, you have these options. Here are the relative strengths and weaknesses of the options based on my reading of the law. Okay. Finance people tend to not care as much about the tax law, but they really do want to know what the answer is. So consider when you're communicating with a CFO who might only care about the effective rate and how to get to a lower effective rate, consider including an executive summary. They also want formal and balanced communication, though. So you're going to present all the strengths and all the weaknesses of any particular position. That's what balanced means. Now, if you are communicating with the government or an administrative agency, you want to have your communication be formal. It would probably take the form of a letter, maybe a letter with an attached memoranda, analytical memoranda, but you want to be persuasive. So you want to say, yes, there's this bad fact, but under the law, the courts have said that this other fact that our client has is actually more important. And so, you're making the case for the government to find in the way that your client wants them to find. Okay, so it's persuasive, not balanced necessarily. You always have to present the bad facts that would weigh against your client, but then you say, those are less important and here's why. And so these other facts that my client has are much more important, and so you should find in favor of my client. Communicating with courts you typically won't do unless you're a lawyer. The exception, though, is the Oregon Tax Court Magistrate Division, where a lot of times a CPA will be called to represent a client in the magistrate division of the tax court, because tax lawyers can be pretty expensive. And the magistrate division is an informal process, and it's analogous to an administrative agency hearing. We'll talk more about that, but just know that you may actually end up appearing in court if you practice in Oregon and your clients have an issue that goes to the magistrate division. Generally speaking, my rule is that even if you are a lawyer, if you're going to appear in court, you need to get a litigator involved. There are a lot of things like rules of court that they care about that, are not relevant to 99% of what I do. And so I want to have someone in my corner who's good at it. And so that's why we'll get a litigator involved, because they care about evidentiary rules and things like that. And so they can help make sure you don't have a foot fault accidentally. Okay, electronic mail. The bane of my existence. When do you send an email? I think the answer is always. People always send emails, and this is sort of a moving target, right? Because, we're seeing more communication by text, but there's not a good way to document text communications for a file, and so I do not encourage you to text about anything substantive with your clients. So you would send an email, in informal type situations. You can also send an email where your client is hard to reach by telephone or postal mail. And this can be generational or access issues. But I, for example, have a client, I've got several foreign clients right now, but one of them is in northern Thailand. And he has email, but because of the time zone difference, because of the fact that the Thai postal service is not completely reliable, we communicate with him entirely by electronic mail. And sometimes this means that we've had to send letters to him that we scan in and send in an email. But, generally we just ask him questions by email, and it's a lot easier. If you are sending just a list of information that you are trying to get, it's a great way to do it. If you're tempted to send a text message, so if it's a question that, but for the fact that this is a professional relationship, you would send a text message, send an email. It's hard to save text messages, so the temptation will be to not save them, and you should always document when you're communicating with your clients. Electronic mails are great when it doesn't matter when they read it, because some people check their mail every hour. Some people check their email every week. It's nice to use an email when you want to send an attachment, like a spreadsheet. And emails are great if you have to send a lot of information to a lot of different people at the same time. So, you can do it with a letter, but they're all going to get it at different times depending on where they are and how reliable the postal service is where they are. So emails are great from that respect. Emails are also great if you need written contemporaneous record of advice that you've given them verbally, or a conversation that you had. And so a lot of times what I'll do if I have a phone call with a client is I'll say, you called, we talked about these things. Here's the pieces of information that you were going to get. And here's what I think the off the cuff answer is, but we're going to continue to look on it, research it. So please don't rely on this, and we'll circle back with you in a few days. So it's good to set expectations in an email, because the client will receive it and say, yes, that's what we talked about, or no, that's not the question I want you to answer. Okay. When not to send an email. So if it's complicated, don't use an email. If there's things that have, analysis, you need to refer to references, put it into a memo or a letter, and then you can email that memo or letter to the client. Keep in mind that email is not secure. Okay, the Postal Service is not secure either, but it has many fewer vulnerabilities than email does. I'm constantly struggling with legal assistants in our office because they keep wanting to get information to clients quickly. And so they will do stupid things like email social security numbers. And that's really bad because it's not secure. And we've come a long way, and they don't do that quite as much anymore, if at all. But part of that was because we just instituted a electronic data room, and they just use the data room now to send secure information to clients. So it's much, much better to use a secure form of communication that has, if you have confidential information that you're trying to convey, or if there are, questions that might involve a social security number, or other information that would be terrible and embarrassing if it got out. The other reason that you should not send an email is because it's too easy to send an email. So if there is any reason that the recipient of the email could mistake your emotional intent, could mistake the tone of how you're communicating, don't send it in an email, okay? And that's just general practical advice. What is an effective email? An effective email is short. Most people will not scroll on an email unless they have to. So it has to get to the point quickly. An effective email is organized, it is polite, it is clear on what actions are required and how to do it, and emails should contain no major spelling or grammatical errors. This includes a subject line. So a lot of times people will have typos, or they'll get the client name wrong or something, and spell check won't catch it because it will be in the subject line. So just make sure that you're proofreading your subject lines as well as the rest of your email. I have on the right side of here an email from IRS to John Doe at johndoe.com. And it's a scam is what it is. A scam? I think it's an example of a IRS email. But it's short and it's to the point, and it says, to access the thing that you need to do, click this. Okay. So you don't have to scroll down because clients won't do it. They won't read a long email that you send them. So it's only useful for things where you don't expect them to read a long email. Okay. So you'll notice on the right that it's a image of a template, of the template that I used. So this should look basically like your emails to me will look. And so the objectives are to identify what you're talking about in the subject line. This email acknowledges that the client reached out to the associate and let her know, and so I'm letting her know that he communicated the subject matter of their conversation, which builds confidence with the client that our people are talking to each other. It is also important when you have clients who might be difficult or abusive to staff for a manager or a partner or someone to send emails occasionally to let them know that we talk to our staff, because it prevents bad behavior on the part of clients. This email also introduces the legal assistant, here my assistant Kelly, to the client and says that Kelly will reach out to you to schedule a follow-up call. And then it gets the client to make sure that the preferred name of the entity that they're trying to form is available with Secretary of State. So that's the action item here. Okay. So, emails have lots of reasons to use them. They have reasons to not use them. But, what I don't want to see happen is I don't want you to be dropping a whole lot of legal analysis into an email, because for the reasons that we've talked about before. Okay. I'm going to have a couple of discussions of some major grammar issues that I see, that I think, particularly because I love grammar memes. But one of the things that I see people do very poorly is use the comma. We'll talk about apostrophes too. But the comma is one of those things where you can really change the use or the intent and the meaning of a sentence by inserting or removing a comma. So, for example, if you say stop clubbing baby seals, you're trying to say someone stop murdering the baby seals with clubs. But if you add a comma after the word clubbing, then you're telling the baby seals to stop clubbing, going to clubs. Okay. Let's eat grandma. Let's eat grandma. You don't want to be eating your grandma. You want to encourage your grandma to come eat with you. So there are reasons to use a comma, and essentially how most people learn to use them is in a sentence, to indicate a pause in a sentence. It helps clarify meaning for the reader. So I have a chart here that you can feel free to print out and use if you have any questions about when to use the comma. But you should always use them before a conjunction. And a conjunction is a phrase like e.g., for example, and, but, if, that joins two main clauses of a sentence. You would also use a comma after an introductory phrase. So, while I was sleeping, comma, Santa left me presents. You use a comma to indicate dialogue or a quote that you want to integrate into your writing, or to set off clauses, phrases, and inessential words, and in a list of 3 or more items. Now, that list of 3 or more items is where I see most people make the most mistakes. Okay. The Oxford or serial comma rule is something that people believe strongly in, and people get a little ridiculous about it. So you'll see all sorts of memes relating to use of the Oxford comma or the serial comma, and really it's just intended to avoid confusion where you have a list of 3 or more things. So not all style guides require it, though, which is interesting. So we've had students before who were raised in British or Commonwealth schools, and so they do not use a serial comma. So this, my heroes are my present parents, Superman and Wonder Woman, does not indicate to them that their parents are Superman and Wonder Woman. It indicates that their hero is, their parents, Superman and Wonder Woman, as 3 separate things. But for purposes of this course, I am going to require that you use the serial comma, because for American English, it is more common than not using the serial comma. Okay, Circular 230. Circular 230, let's talk about Circular 230. Circular 230 are the rules that govern practice before the IRS, and it is codified, which means put into a code, at 31 CFR Subtitle A, Part 10. And what the CFR is it's the Code of Federal Regulations. So we'll talk more about regulations in a couple of weeks. But this, just know that it is similarly organized to the Internal Revenue Code. So the Internal Revenue Code is at 26 USC. And so 26 CFR is the Treasury regulations. And so this is actually outside of the Treasury regulations, which causes some confusion when people go looking for it. But, the IRS has a landing place, because IRS is not just IRS, it's much bigger than IRS, or Treasury is not just IRS. And so so it's 31 is where it's housed, which is Treasury regulations generally. It defines practitioner to include attorneys, CPAs, enrolled agents, actuaries, retirement plan agents, and tax return preparers who represent clients before the IRS and appraisers. Okay, so, and it also defines what practice before the IRS means. And what practice before the IRS means is a really broad list of different things that include corresponding and talking to the IRS on behalf of your clients, representing your clients at conferences, hearings, or meetings, preparing and submitting responses to IRS notice or inquiry, signing agreements like an extension of the statute of limitations for the assessment of tax, and providing tax advice. Okay, that last one is a really big bucket. And so if you are providing tax advice, and that tax advice is federal tax advice, then you are practicing before the IRS. And so everybody who provides federal tax advice is practicing before the Internal Revenue Service, and therefore your behavior is going to be governed by the rules in Circular 230. Okay, so practice before the IRS doesn't mean that you regularly go in and have meetings with them. It can be a whole bunch of other things. So the Office of Professional Responsibility is the department within the Treasury that's charged with overseeing practitioner conduct and compliance with Circular 230. So are people following the rules? It used to be known as the Office of the Director of Practice, but now it's known as OPR. And so it investigates and can sanction practitioners for violations of Circular 230. There is actually a database that you can go to, and I put the link here, to see who's been sanctioned. It's not a huge list, but if you are publicly sanctioned before the IRS, it means that many, many things have gone wrong along the way. So if you are contacted by OPR, so if the Office of Professional Responsibility reaches out to you about a case that you were involved with, you need to retain malpractice counsel and have malpractice counsel represent you in those negotiations before the IRS. Okay, because these are the sorts of things that people lose their ability to do their job professionally if things go sideways with an investigation. Okay, so what is misconduct? There's a lot of things that can constitute misconduct. What we're really worried about are willful violations of the rules. So willful violations of the rules are intentional violations of a known duty. So you have to have intent, you have to know that there's a duty, and you have to say, no, I'm choosing to ignore that duty and do this other thing. It's also understatement due to unreasonable positions. So if you have clients that you are helping participate in tax shelter transactions and, or abusive tax shelter transactions, then the auditor who reports you may fill out one of these forms, which is a report of suspected practitioner misconduct to the Office of Professional Responsibility. It's Form 8484. And IRS agents are directed where they are doing an audit and they see a practitioner who is acting badly to submit a referral to say, OPR, come take a look at this person. Here's what's going on. Here's what I've observed. So you never want to be the subject of one of these things if you can. But it's useful to know what the form looks like, because you can see, okay, well, here's the sorts of things, the sorts of relationships that you can have as a practitioner before the IRS that give rise to a possible misconduct claim. And then, the auditor who's filling it out has to explain what's going on. And they can attach additional pages and things like that. So, so it is, if you practice before the IRS, you don't want to be the subject of one of these things. Circular 230 does establish sanctions for practitioner misconduct, and these can be formal sanctions or informal sanctions. Formal sanctions can be things like, financial penalties, censure, which is a public reprimand. So basically you end up on the list, or you end up in the tax publication saying this person did this very bad thing. They can actually suspend your right to practice before the IRS for years or forever. You can petition for reinstatement after a period of time with a suspension. But if you are disbarred, so if they say, no, this is sufficiently bad that we never want you practicing before us again, you may not petition for reinstatement for 5 years after disbarment occurs. If you are an appraiser, if you are censured, if you're sanctioned before the IRS in formal sanctions, that sanction can disqualify you from having an appraisal that you've prepared be attached to a tax return or be used in connection with any tax matter. And the appraisers are very careful about this because the value of assets is a very critical issue in a lot of areas of tax law. And so we attach a lot of appraisals to things that we submit to IRS. And so an appraiser will lose a large portion of their business if they cannot testify before the IRS and if they cannot have their appraisals attached, for example, to an estate tax return or a business sale report. Okay. There are also informal sanctions, which can be a private reprimand, basically a letter that's not made public saying, don't do this thing again, or that says, okay, here's what you did, and, don't do this again, and if you do it again, it can become a much bigger issue. So there are consequences to not complying with Circular 230, which is really why we're talking about this, because we'll talk about how you comply with Circular 230 over the course of the term. But I wanted to make sure you realize that there's a reason why we do this, besides the fact that it's better for our clients if you comply with Circular 230. It can have actual immediate personal impact to you. So practice before the IRS, we talked about all the different categories of things that practice before the IRS constitutes. Not being able to do it is really bad for your career. And so we have a lot of things in place that are designed to protect our ability to practice before the IRS and designed to ensure that we don't have Circular 230 violations going forward. How do you stay in compliance with Circular 230? Basically, it's straightforward. You learn the rules, you follow the rules. There's a lot of overlap in these areas with AICPA and Oregon professional conduct rules. So, we'll talk about areas, like major areas, but when you're out in practice, you should, attend continuing education to, keep on top of changes to the ethical rules and make sure that you understand what your obligations are as far as following them, because you want to continue to be able to keep your license and be able to practice before the IRS. Okay, so let's talk briefly about the weekly quizzes and homework again, and I'll give you your final homework assignment for this class, this lecture. So quizzes, essentially how you get to a quiz in Canvas is you click on the quizzes tab in Canvas or access through the week's module, and you click on the quiz for the current week. So there'll be a quiz labeled Week 1 quiz. Complete the quiz for the current week. The quiz is going to be up as soon as I post the video link for each week, which will be, usually I'll do everything, get everything together on Sunday night, and it will go live on Monday. And it will be due no later than the following Sunday at 11:59 p.m. I'm never really sure how to put midnight into these things, so we'll say 11:59 p.m. If you can't do the quiz and you know that there's some sort of crisis going on, like maybe you ended up in the hospital, we've had students run into that issue, shoot me an email before Sunday at 11:59 p.m., please. Assignments. You access assignments the same way. So you click on assignment or access it through the current week's module and click on the assignment for the current week. Read it, go to the content tab, navigate to the basic course information, and find the right template that the thing asks you to use. Okay. The assignments are also going to be available when the lecture is posted each week. So submit the Word document version of your completed assignment no later than the following Sunday at 11:59 p.m. The exception to this is the memoranda assignment and the two memoranda assignments. The final one is going to be more of a tax opinion, because I want you to tell me how confident you are in your own research. But the those you're going to have more time to work on. So, just make sure that if you are not able to reach, turn things in by your deadline, and, if you have additional time that we've talked about, by the time that we've talked about, then just let me know, okay? Because I can't do anything about a late assignment unless you tell me in advance. I've had students kind of not understand that rule, and it's created problems and stress for them, but that's the way it is. Okay, so week 1 homework. Using the email template, so go into the basic course information and download the email template. Prepare an email to me explaining 3 things that I should know about you, what you hope to learn from this course, whether you've had tax courses before and which one, and any questions you have for me as we start out. Okay, so make sure that you answer all of those questions, or include information to address all of those points. And if you've got questions about how to do that, if you've got questions about anything in this lecture, let me know, or, in the course in general, let me know. And I look forward to working with you this term. Have a great evening.